She just wanted a quiet evening, a dinner to celebrate her baby's first kick. The restaurant sparkled with soft lights, laughter, and the scent of roses. But the smile on her face faded when the waiter leaned over her table with a smirk that sliced deeper than any insult. "Maybe you'd feel more comfortable somewhere. Cheaper," he whispered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Eyes turned. Laughter echoed. She swallowed her tears, unaware that every cruel second was being recorded. Because what that waiter didn't know was that the man she was waiting for owned every single hotel in that city, including this one. The evening had started perfectly. Maya Daniels, 7 months pregnant and glowing with the gentle grace of motherhood, arrived early at the Grand Meridian, a luxury hotel in downtown Atlanta. She had dressed carefully, a simple cream dress, her hair tied in a soft bun, and a small smile that carried quiet pride. Tonight wasn't just dinner. It was her husband's birthday, a man who worked endlessly but promised to meet her here, in the very hotel that had become their favorite place over the years. As she walked in, the lobby shimmered under golden chandeliers. A pianist played something soft in the corner. The atmosphere whispered wealth and elegance. But to some eyes, Maya didn't belong. The waiter, a young man named Colin, noticed her the moment she stepped in. His expression twisted slightly, a mixture of arrogance and something uglier. He saw the color of her skin before he saw the kindness in her eyes. When Maya politely asked for a table for two near the window, his smirk formed instantly. "Ma'am, that area is reserved," he said, without even checking the chart. She nodded, calm and polite as always. "That's fine. Any table will do." He led her toward the far end of the room, the corner closest to the kitchen doors. Plates clattered nearby, waiters rushed past, and the soft music seemed distant here. She took her seat quietly. Her hand rested on her belly. The baby kicked again, as if reminding her that even in discomfort, life still moves forward. Other guests glanced her way, some curious, some judgmental. Colin returned to her table, pretending to wipe the surface though it was spotless. "You know," he said with an unearned grin, "we don't usually get guests like you here." Maya's heart tightened, but she kept her voice gentle. "I'm just here for dinner." He walked away before she could say more. Outside the large glass windows, the city glowed in amber lights. Her husband was on his way, she reminded herself. Just a few more minutes. She had no idea that by the time he arrived, every face in this restaurant would look different, ashamed, silent, or shocked. The minutes ticked by like hours. Maya sat silently, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. Around her, the restaurant hummed with chatter and clinking silverware, but it all felt distant, like she was trapped behind glass unseen. Colin, the waiter, passed her table several times, but didn't bother to refill her water. Each time he walked by, his smirk deepened, as though her quiet patience amused him. At the next table, a couple whispered. The woman, in a glittering red dress, tilted her head toward Maya and said softly, "Maybe she wandered into the wrong place." Her husband chuckled. Maya heard them, but she pretended not to. She'd learned long ago that sometimes silence was the loudest answer. She checked her phone. Her husband Daniel had texted, "Traffic slow, but I'm almost there. Order something light, love." She smiled faintly at the message, a moment of warmth in a room that had grown cold. But when she looked up, Colin stood before her again. "Still waiting?" he asked, tone dripping with mock concern. "Yes, my husband's on his way." "Right," he muttered. "Well, we have a policy. No single guests holding tables for over 20 minutes. Especially during dinner rush." Her brows knit together. "I didn't realize that was a rule." He leaned in closer. "It's not written down. It's just understood." He walked off again before she could respond. Maya's cheeks burned. Every eye seemed to turn toward her, pitying, judgmental, or entertained. A young busboy, barely 17, passed her table and paused as if to say something. But Colin's glare from across the room froze him in place. The humiliation deepened when Colin returned with 2 glasses of water. He placed one on the empty seat, Daniel's, and the other before her. But this time, his hand slipped accidentally. The cold water splashed across her lap, soaking her dress. The restaurant gasped. Maya froze, her breath catching as shock turned into disbelief. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Colin said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But his grin betrayed the apology. "I guess some people just attract trouble." Maya stared at him, eyes glistening. "Please, just bring me a napkin." "Of course, ma'am," he said mockingly. "I'll see if we have some left in your price range." The laughter from the nearby table stung sharper than the water. Maya stood, trembling slightly, and reached for her purse. "I'll leave," she whispered, but before she could take a step, a calm, steady voice echoed through the restaurant. "No, you'll stay." The voice was deep, commanding, the kind that silenced entire rooms. Maya turned. Daniel stood by the entrance, tall in his charcoal gray suit, his presence radiating authority. He walked forward slowly, eyes fixed on Colin, who suddenly seemed much smaller than before. The laughter died instantly. "Sir, this area is for guests only," Colin said quickly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you told my wife too?" The manager, a nervous-looking man in a tie too tight for his neck, hurried over. "Sir, please, there seems to be some misunderstanding." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding," Daniel cut in, voice firm but calm. "I've seen enough." He took Maya's hand gently, helping her back into her chair. "You're not leaving, love. You're going to finish your dinner." Colin blinked, confused. "Sir, if you'd like a different table," Daniel turned to him slowly. "Tell me, how long have you worked here?" "About 2 years," he said cautiously. Daniel nodded. "Good. Then you probably know who signs your paychecks." The waiter frowned, unsure. The manager's face paled. "Mr. Daniels," he began, voice trembling. "You didn't mention." "I don't have to," Daniel said, eyes never leaving the waiter. "This entire hotel, from the marble floors to the kitchen tiles, is under my company's ownership." The silence that followed was suffocating. Colin's smirk vanished. The red-dressed woman at the nearby table looked down, ashamed. The pianist stopped mid-note. Every guest realized what they just witnessed, a moment where cruelty met consequence. Daniel placed his hand over Maya's and said quietly, "You don't ever have to leave a table that you belong to." Then he turned to the manager. "Get her a new chair. Bring towels. And make sure this man," his gaze locked on Colin, "never serves another guest here again." The manager nodded furiously. Colin's hand shook as he muttered an apology, but the damage was done not just to his pride, but to the entire room's conscience. Maya's tears finally fell, but not from shame, from relief. The power had shifted. The room that had judged her now looked at her with quiet awe. For a long moment, no one moved. The restaurant that once buzzed with chatter now held its breath. All eyes stayed fixed on Daniel, calm, controlled, yet carrying a quiet fire that demanded respect. Colin tried to stammer an apology, but his voice broke. "Sir, I didn't know." Daniel's tone cut through him like glass. "You didn't care to know." He stood tall beside Maya's chair, his shadow stretching over the trembling waiter. "You saw a black woman alone and made a choice. You thought kindness was optional. You thought dignity could be denied. Tell me, how do you serve guests when you've already decided who deserves to be one?" The words hung in the air, heavy as truth. The manager swallowed hard. "Mr. Daniels, please, we'll handle this. We'll terminate him immediately." Daniel raised a hand, stopping him. "No, don't fire him yet." The waiter looked up, confused, hope flickering in his eyes. Daniel turned to the nearby guests, the same ones who had whispered and laughed earlier. "You all enjoyed the show, didn't you? A woman humiliated and not one of you said a word. But now you'll sit quietly and watch the lesson." He faced Colin again. "You'll apologize." "Not to me. To her." Colin's throat tightened. I'm sorry, ma'am." Maya met his eyes, calm, composed. "No," she said softly. "You're sorry because you were caught, not because you cared." Her words pierced the silence. Even Daniel paused. There it was, the quiet strength that had always been hers. Daniel nodded slowly. "You heard her. So here's what will happen." He turned toward the entire staff now gathering near the counter. Tomorrow morning, this restaurant will close for 2 hours. Every employee will attend a mandatory session on racial conduct taught by professionals I'll personally hire. And you, he pointed to Colin, will attend every single one of them. Front row. Colin lowered his head, shame turning his cheeks red. Daniel's gaze softened as he looked at Maya. I built this empire so people could walk in and feel respected, not measured. Somewhere along the way, maybe we all forgot that. He looked back at the stunned crowd. If you can't see humanity before status, you don't deserve to serve anyone. Applause began softly, from the young busboy who had earlier frozen in fear. Then another person joined, and another. Within seconds, the room echoed with claps, not just for wealth or power, but for dignity finally reclaiming its place. Maya's tears glistened under the chandelier as Daniel gently pulled out a chair for her again. Dinner's served, love, he whispered with a faint smile, and for the first time that night, she felt seen. Not because of who her husband was, but because, at last, everyone else saw who she truly was. The clapping faded into a hush, replaced by something heavier, reflection. Every person in that restaurant, from the waiter to the guests who once laughed, now sat in quiet shame. The piano began again, softly this time, like an apology wrapped in melody. Maya sat still, a napkin on her lap, her eyes lowered but her spirit unshaken. Daniel watched her for a moment, realizing that even with all his power, she had been the stronger one tonight. Strength, he thought, wasn't measured in ownership. It was measured in grace under fire. Colin stood by the doorway, waiting for permission to leave. Daniel finally turned to him. You can go, he said quietly. But before you do, remember this. You can't wash away what you did tonight. You can only start changing who you are tomorrow. Colin nodded, his voice too small to respond. He walked out without meeting anyone's eyes. The manager approached nervously. Sir, again, I'm so sorry, Daniel interrupted gently. Don't apologize to me. Fix your culture. That's how you'll apologize. Then he turned back to his wife. You okay? Maya nodded slowly, exhaling the weight she'd been holding. I'm okay now, she whispered. I just didn't want our baby's first memory to be hate. Daniel took her hand, his thumb brushing against her wedding ring. Then let's make sure it isn't. Let's make it hope. Outside, rain had begun to fall, gentle at first, then steady. Through the large windows, droplets streaked down the glass, reflecting the restaurant's golden light. Maya smiled faintly. Funny, she said softly. It's like the world's trying to wash the night clean. Daniel looked out with her. Maybe it's a start. The busboy came by quietly with a towel and a fresh cup of tea. He didn't say anything, just smiled shyly before leaving. That small act, simple, human, meant more to Maya than all the silence that had come before as they finally ate. A new kind of calm filled the air. The restaurant had changed, not in its design, but in its spirit. People spoke softer, looked longer, thought deeper. And when Maya and Daniel stood to leave, no one whispered. No one laughed. They simply stood aside, letting them pass, not out of fear, but respect. Because that night, everyone had learned something unspoken. It doesn't take wealth to show humanity, just the courage to see someone's worth before the world tells you what it's worth in gold.